As the fading sunset cast long shadows over a quiet suburban street, the sudden wail of police sirens shattered the evening calm like a razor slicing through silk. Neighbors, who had been peacefully mowing their lawns or watering their plants, paused and turned their heads in curiosity. A black and white patrol car sped past, its flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the glass windows, signaling that something was about to go terribly wrong. No one knew yet that, in the heart of this seemingly harmless neighborhood, a tragedy was about to unfold, one centered around James Carter, a black man with a past no one could have imagined. James walked along the sidewalk, his sneakers rhythmically tapping against the pavement, one hand gripping the leash of Tyson, his loyal German shepherd. The dog moved beside him, ears erect, eyes alert, its every step exuding a natural wariness. For James, this was a rare moment of peace after months of working abroad. He was a former Delta Force commander, a man who had survived the most brutal battlefields where life hung by a thread. Now back home, he only wanted to enjoy some quiet time with Tyson, his steadfast companion through countless storms. But peace, for a man like James, was always a fleeting luxury. The patrol car suddenly slowed down, rolling beside him like a predator stalking its prey. James cast a sidelong glance, a cold sensation creeping down his spine, not out of fear, but because he recognized the eyes staring at him from inside the vehicle. Officers Robert Callahan and Thomas Reed, notorious in the area for their wolfish tendencies. They didn't just enforce the law, they were the law, or at least that's how they behaved, with unjustified arrests, unnecessary beatings, and complaints that mysteriously vanished within the system. James knew of them, but he never expected that today they would choose him as their next target. The car door swung open. Callahan stepped out first, his polished leather shoes clicking against the pavement, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. Reed followed, his narrow eyes scanning James as if assessing a threat. "Good evening," Callahan greeted, but the smirk on his lips held no friendliness. "You live around here?" His tone wasn't a question, it was an accusation. James stopped walking, turning to face them, keeping his expression calm despite the storm brewing inside him. "Yes, officer," he replied, his voice steady, polite to perfection. "Just out for a walk with my dog." Reed scoffed, stepping closer, deliberately invading his space. "Big dog," he noted, eyes locked on Tyson, whose muscles tensed, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "Is he trained?" James nodded, gripping the leash tighter. "Yes, very disciplined. He protects me." Callahan's smirk widened, his eyes gleaming with something sinister. "Protects you? Sounds more like an attack dog." James kept his tone even. "No, officer. He only follows orders." But Callahan and Reed weren't interested in answers. To them, James wasn't a resident, he was a problem to be dealt with. "I need to see some ID," Callahan demanded, his voice ice cold. James moved slowly, pulling out his wallet, fully aware of his rights but also knowing that resistance would only invite trouble. Reed snatched the ID, glanced at it, then sneered. "James Carter, huh? Delta Force? Sounds impressive." He tossed the ID back, purposefully letting it drop to the ground. James bent to pick it up, swallowing the surge of humiliation rising in his chest. But the situation escalated in an instant. Sensing the hostility, Tyson stepped forward, fur bristling, another warning growl escaping his throat. Reed instantly recoiled, his hand flying to his gun. "Control your damn dog," he barked, his voice laced with both fear and malice. James tightened the leash, issuing a firm command. "Tyson, stand down." Tyson obeyed, sitting back, but his eyes never left the officers, muscles coiled like a loaded spring. Callahan chuckled darkly, stepping even closer. "Listen, boy, I don't like your attitude. Turn around, hands behind your back." James clenched his jaw, but he knew that fighting back would only make things worse. "I haven't done anything wrong," he said, voice low but sharp. Callahan shrugged, a sick amusement flickering in his gaze. "Then you won't mind following orders, right?" Tyson growled again, this time louder, and that was the final trigger. Reed pulled his gun without hesitation. "I warned you," he shouted. The gunshot rang out, deafening in the still evening air. The bullet struck Tyson square in the chest. The dog collapsed, blood pooling beneath him, his deep brown eyes flickering with confusion before dimming forever. Time seemed to freeze. James let out a raw, agonized scream, dropping to his knees beside Tyson, cradling the lifeless body as warm blood seeped through his fingers. "No. Tyson." His voice tore through the night, filled with a pain that could shatter stone. Callahan chuckled under his breath. "Should have kept him under control," he murmured as if he had just swatted a fly. James lifted his head, his eyes burning red with fury. The grief, the humiliation, the years of restraint, everything shattered in that moment. He lunged at Reed, but before he could reach him, Callahan tackled him to the ground. A taser crackled, sending volts of electricity coursing through his body, making him convulse violently. They cuffed him, threw him into the patrol car, leaving Tyson's lifeless body behind on the cold pavement. James was held for hours, beaten further in the shadows of the precinct. But in the end they let him go. No charges, no justification, just another black man brutalized and discarded. As he stepped out of the station, body aching, clothes still stained with Tyson's blood, James Carter was no longer a man seeking peace. Inside him, something had awakened. Callahan and Reed had lit a fire they couldn't extinguish. And James, a man forged in war, was about to show them the true meaning of vengeance. Night fell like a thick black curtain. No moon, no stars, only the sound of the wind howling through the dark alleys at the city's edge. James Carter sat in his car, his eyes cold and sharp as a blade, watching every movement of Robert Callahan from a distance. The cop, now just a staggering silhouette, stepped out of a rundown bar, the place he frequented to shed his mask of law enforcer and reveal his true self. A drunkard, an arrogant brute, unaware that he was being hunted. James tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his breathing steady, his heart beating slowly like a war machine primed for battle. Tyson was gone, but the memory of his loyal companion's death now fueled a burning rage within him, a fire that would only be extinguished when Callahan and Thomas Reed were completely destroyed. James had spent days studying them. Callahan had a taste for cheap liquor and random women, always parking his car in the dimly lit, camera-free alley behind the bar. Reed was more cautious, but ever since the incident with Tyson, paranoia had eaten away at his composure. He constantly looked over his shoulder, sensing something lurking in the shadows. James wasn't in a rush. He was a ghost in the darkness, patient as an assassin trained through countless battlefields. And tonight, Callahan would be the first to taste the nightmare James had prepared. Callahan staggered into the alley, cursing as he dropped his keys. He bent down, unsteady from the alcohol, and that was when James struck. Like a flash of lightning, he lunged forward, his steel-toed boots slamming into Callahan's ribs, sending him crashing to the ground. His head hit the concrete with a sickening crack. Callahan groaned, his hands scrambling in panic. He never finished. James delivered another brutal kick to his stomach, cutting off his breath and making him curl up like a crushed insect. James grabbed him by the collar, yanking him up, whispering in an icy tone, "You like playing God, don't you? I'll show you what real hell looks like." Callahan trembled, but James gave him no chance to respond. A punch straight to the face sent blood splattering, and then he let the cop drop like a discarded bag of trash. "This is just the beginning," James murmured before vanishing into the darkness, leaving Callahan bloodied on the pavement, fear creeping into him for the first time in his life. But beating them wasn't enough. James wanted to dismantle them piece by piece. He knew Callahan and Reed wouldn't sit still after the attack. They would come for him, and he had already set the perfect trap. His home was now a meticulously staged battleground. A whiskey bottle carelessly left on the table as if he had drowned himself in alcohol, stacks of unopened letters piled on the shelf, and most importantly an unlocked gun safe, suggesting recklessness. Hidden cameras were placed everywhere, in the wall clock, inside the light fixture, beneath the bookshelf, recording from every angle without detection. James sat in the living room waiting, and when the pounding on his door echoed like rolling thunder, he knew the moment had arrived. Callahan kicked the door open, Reed close behind, their eyes burning with fury and unease. "You think you're a tough guy, huh?" Callahan growled, shoving James against the table, sending the whiskey bottle crashing to the floor. James didn't resist, letting them act freely. Every punch, every slap was a bullet they unknowingly fired into their own feet. Reed sneered, "No dog to save you this time, ha, you piece of trash?" They punched his ribs, kicked his legs, slammed him into the wall, but James remained expressionless, his breathing heavy but his gaze unwavering. "Are you done?" he rasped, his voice hoarse yet taunting. Callahan smirked, "Watch yourself, Carter. Next time you won't get away." Then they left, leaving James sprawled on the floor, but a slow smile crept onto his lips. They had just dug their own graves. Next was Reed. Sleepless, afraid, he had taken to visiting another seedy bar, drowning himself in liquor. James followed, a shadow in the night, waiting until Reed stumbled into the alley behind the bar, drunk and disoriented. "Long night, Reed," James murmured, making Reed spin around, his hand trembling as it reached for the gun at his hip. He never got to draw it. James struck first, his fist colliding with Reed's face, sending him sprawling. "Remember me?" James growled, delivering a brutal kick to Reed's chest, making him cough up blood. "Do you remember the bullet you put in Tyson?" Reed whimpered, trying to crawl away, but James didn't allow it. Blow after blow rained down, a storm of vengeance, repaying every ounce of pain Reed had inflicted, tenfold. Reed lay there, broken, gasping for air, while James stood over him, cold and merciless. This is just the beginning. To seal the trap, James drove straight to the Bellagio Casino, a place bustling with lights and people. He strolled through the halls, letting security cameras capture every step, chatting with employees, deliberately losing a few hands at the poker table, even ordering a strong whiskey and toasting with the bartender. "Rough night?" the bartender asked. James smirked. "Something like that." Dozens of witnesses saw him there, while miles away, Reed lay battered in an alley, an unbreakable alibi. James left the casino, drove home, and when the red and blue lights of the police cars flashed outside his gate, he smiled. They had come to arrest him, but he was 3 moves ahead. The footage from his hidden cameras, showing Callahan and Reed attacking him, had already been sent out, spreading like wildfire across social media, police headquarters and news outlets. The storm had begun and James was the one steering it. The cold white light in the courtroom cut through the space like a blade, illuminating James Carter's hardened face as he sat on the witness stand. His eyes, sharp as they had been during his days leading life-or-death battles in Delta Force, were now locked onto the 2 men who had once been his nightmare, Robert Callahan and Thomas Reed. They sat at the defendant's table, stripped of the arrogance they once carried as men of authority. Callahan was pale as a corpse, his hands trembling. Reed curled inward, his wild eyes knowing that their walls of protection had crumbled. Behind James, the courtroom was packed. Journalists, activists, civilians, all holding their breath, waiting for justice to be delivered. The storm James had ignited had now exploded beyond control. The footage from his trap, the brutal assault by Callahan and Reed in his own home, had spread across every corner of the media, from social networks to evening news, turning them into symbols of corruption within the police force. The department had severed ties immediately, firing them without hesitation, but James hadn't stopped there. He had filed an official lawsuit, bringing every piece of evidence, from Tyson's death to dozens of covered-up abuses, straight to internal affairs and the press. Now, in this courtroom he was not just a victim. He was the blade poised to cut the last thread holding Callahan and Reed above damnation. The prosecutor, a woman with eyes like steel, stepped forward. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice resonant, "please tell us about the night of March 4th. James took a deep breath, the memory of Tyson slashing through his mind. "I was taking Tyson for a walk," he said, his voice steady but firm. "He was my friend, my family, a 6-year-old German shepherd, loyal, highly trained. We were just passing through the neighborhood when Callahan and Reed appeared." He paused, locking eyes with them, watching Callahan squirm uncomfortably. "They told me I didn't belong there, demanded my ID despite the fact that I had already proven I lived there. I didn't resist, didn't raise my voice, but none of that mattered." "And Tyson?" the prosecutor pressed. James clenched his fists, his voice turning hoarse. He sensed the danger. When Reed stepped forward, he growled, "Not attacking, just protecting me." I ordered him to stand down and he obeyed. "But Reed—" James stopped, his burning gaze fixed on the man who had fired the shot. He drew his gun and fired. A single shot straight into the chest. Tyson dropped right in front of me without a sound, just blood and his eyes looking at me one last time. The courtroom fell silent, a few people stifling sobs. Reed stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The prosecutor nodded and played the footage from James's home on the large screen. The shouts, the brutal punches, the kicks, Callahan and Reed's vicious attack played out for everyone to see. "And then they came to your house?" she asked. James nodded. "No warrant, no cause, just violence. They thought they were untouchable." He turned to the jury. "They are criminals and I'm here to make sure they pay." Callahan shuddered, Reed bit his lip until it bled. They knew they had lost. The trial continued with their defense collapsing completely. Their lawyer attempted to twist the narrative, suggesting James was driven by emotion, that his Delta Force background made him a dangerous man. James responded coldly, "I'm only dangerous to those who deserve to fear me." His words cut like a knife, silencing the room. The prosecutor called Callahan and Reed to the stand, tearing apart their pasts. 17 complaints of excessive force buried, countless testimonies silenced. Callahan stammered, "I was just doing my job." The prosecutor smirked. "Is breaking the law part of your job?" Reed fared worse. When questioned about Tyson, he muttered, "It was justified." The jury looked at him as if he were a monster. The judge, a stern man with dagger-sharp eyes, declared, "It is time to end this." The prosecutor stood tall, her voice sharp as a blade. "This is not a complicated case. This is about two men who abused their power, destroyed lives, and were stopped by a man who refused to stay silent. You have the power to finish what James Carter started." The defense lawyer mumbled something weak, but no one cared. The jury took only an hour to return their verdict. Guilty, on all charges from excessive force to aggravated assault, even attempted murder. The judge slammed his gavel, his voice deep and resounding. "Callahan, Reed, you have abused your authority, betrayed public trust, and shown no remorse, only arrogance. I have no sympathy for you." Callahan buried his face in his hands, Reed's mouth fell open in horror. "I sentence each of you to 25 years in federal prison, no parole." The courtroom erupted, applause, cries, shouts, but James simply stood up. Justice had been served, not with joy but with the finality he needed. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed him. "How do you feel, Mr. Carter?" James stared directly into the cameras, his voice calm. "They got what they deserved." Then he turned away, passing Callahan and Reed one last time, two pathetic figures drowned in a sea of booze. That night, every news channel broadcast their fall from grace, their badges stripped, their bodies shoved into a prison van, while James Carter's name echoed as a symbol of resilience. Days later, James stood in a quiet cemetery before a small grave. The headstone read, "Tyson loyal to the end." He knelt, placing a faded photograph, him and Tyson in the backyard, the sunlight glistening off the dog's black coat. "It's over, buddy," he whispered, his voice rough. "I made them pay step by step, piece by piece. You'd be proud." The wind carried the scent of fresh grass, as if Tyson were still there, listening. "I let them hit me, let them think they won, and then I burned their entire world. Jobs, reputations, freedom. They'll rot in prison, and every single day they'll remember me." James pressed his hand against the headstone, his vision blurring. "I don't know if I can let go, Tyson. But I kept my promise." He stood up, taking a deep breath, gazing one last time at the sky tinged with sunset. "Goodbye, friend." Then he walked away, never looking back, leaving the storm behind. A man who had won, but whose heart would bear the scars forever.